Good morning and welcome. It's good to be with each of you again this morning. It's good to worship God together here in this place. Of course, it is our prayer that our worship is in accordance with what God has prescribed and asked for, as found in our New Testaments. Well, we've been studying for the last several weeks that of our relationships by way of family. And this morning, of course, we've got one more Sunday until Father's Day. I promise. I'm going to give Father's Day, and then we're going to get off the family. I'm not going to wear this one out. Bear with me. This morning we're going to talk about children and parent relationships. You know, we've talked a lot about that of our maybe the roles of mothers and fathers and husbands and wives and extended family and parents and grandparents, and we've not spent a lot of time on children. And so this morning, certainly there will be a part of this that is on parenting, but there's yet a part of this that's on children, because for as much as parents have a responsibility before God as parents, children have a responsibility before God as children, and so there are things that children must do as well. You know, Paul in his letter to the Ephesians, in Ephesians chapter 6, about verse 1, instructs children. Now, Paul has been dealing with, at the end of chapter 5, he's been dealing with the husband and wife relationship, and he's compared it to the relationship that Christ has to the church as the bride of Christ. And in chapter 6 and verse 1, he says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right." And then in verse 2, he calls to mind part of the law of Moses. He says, "Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. And you, fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord." And I suppose that we could spend the hour just considering this verse, and we would pretty well cover both the role of children, the role of parents. But there's a lot more that is in our Bibles concerning these things, and we'll consider these things this morning. First of all, some biblical foundations of parenting. Not just fathers, right? Not just fathers don't provoke your children to wrath. Not just fathers train them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But some other big biblical foundations. First of all, the proverb writer. Throughout the book of Proverbs, there are these truths that we find, and there's a lot said there on parents and on children. But just for starters, Proverb 22 and verse 6, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Now, I get it. That's a generality. Generally speaking, if we train a child in this way, they're going to stay on this course, so to speak. That's the idea. That doesn't mean that we're going to win every child in that way, but it's a good start. It certainly is a better start than letting a child raise themselves, which is what we see in so many places in our society today. It's a better place, parents, for us to raise up our children in the way they should go than to let the world raise up our children, let the TV raise up our children, let the cell phone raise up our children. We go on and on, couldn't we? We, as parents, have this responsibility. We have to do this. In 1 Timothy chapter 5, 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8, Paul says, "If anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." Now, Paul is talking here, in truth, about those who are neglecting their elderly parents and grandparents, right? But we can make the same application of a man for a family, and we have, right? We each have a responsibility to care for in a physical way, right? Those things which are physically important. And so we have an obligation as parents to do that. And then we have a duty to teach our children that of the spiritual nature, God's commandments. And this was something Israel did, and we've said this, right? Deuteronomy chapter 6 and in verse 6. "These words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. Whatever you're doing, be teaching your children about God. Be teaching your children about the things which God has done before you, Israel. Right? Be teaching your children about God's laws and about His commandments and about the things that God wants you as His chosen special people to be. Now, Christians, we are the Israel of this age. We are God's special people today. And so, do you think it's important that we teach our children? We teach our children to observe those things which God has commanded. We teach our children the way that God wants us to walk in this life. When we walk by the way, when we sit in our house, when we rise up, when we lie down, is it important at all times to be teaching our children these things? I think it is. And so we have a duty to train our children in God's ways. And so some biblical foundations of parenting. But all of the instruction, right, we can talk until we're blue in the face. But it's not always good for us to just talk to our children. Sometimes they need correction. Sometimes they need discipline. Proverb writer, again, general truths. Proverbs 12 and verse 1. Whoever loves instruction loves knowledge, but he who hates correction is, notice what the proverb writer says there, is stupid. Is stupid. Do we want to be stupid? Do we want our children to be stupid? I'll give you a second for that to sink in, because it's important. We live in a day and age where sociologists, psychologists, all kinds of ologists have said don't correct your children with physical correction. Don't do these things, it hurts them. It makes them angry. Now look, I'm not saying we need to abuse our children. That's not at all the case. My parents, they didn't overly correct me by any means. And yeah, Dad would take his belt off, and you didn't let him get past that, what was it, the second loop? Because you were getting spanking, right? And Mom, whatever was handy, if you needed correction, she was going to correct you with whatever she had handy. Yardstick, wooden spoon, you name it. I wasn't abused. I was corrected. You know, I served in the military 13 years, and there is, I suppose, a lot of value in pain. Preacher, what are you talking about? If you need somebody to really learn a lesson, to really make an application of don't do this thing, get your mind right, get your head in the right space, put them through a little pain. Again, I'm not evoking abuse. But pain has a way of sticking with us and instructing us and correcting us. A corrective swat on the backside of a toddler is okay. It's not a beating. It's corrective. When your little kid is going for something that is going to break or hurt them, when the infant is going for the power strip on the wall with their little hands, do you just let them go? No. Now, I've seen it, right? I've seen it where the parent goes, well, I'm just going to move them. And you move the kid, and what do? They move right back to what they had their attention. And you might move them all day, young parents, young mothers, you know what I'm talking about. But if you swat their hand, when they're reaching for the thing, does it instruct them? And do they learn that I shouldn't touch the thing because I'm going to get a hand swat, right? And so by way of that, pain instructs them. Now, did you hurt them? No. But you reinforced the word no, didn't you? Again, this is a basic principle. The Hebrew writer in Hebrews chapter 12 applies this principle to us, I think. We're going to come back to this in a little bit, but Hebrews 12 and verse 7, he says, if you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate, not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Now, I'm not telling you that the only way to discipline is spanking. But discipline must have some measure of discomfort that accompanies it to evoke correction. That's the whole point of discipline. And so you must be corrective, parents. Not just simply talking to your children. Now, do they need to understand why, especially as they get older, right? They need to understand and be able to reason why they're in trouble and why they shouldn't do the thing that they did, or why they shouldn't do the thing that they want to do. And so we've got to guide them in that way. And so we have a responsibility, parents, to discipline. It's a necessity, right? If we don't love our children, rather, if we love our children, we will discipline them. If we want our children to not be stupid, again, the proverb writer says, we're going to correct them. If you hate correction, parents, does it hurt us as much as it does them? Maybe not in a physical way, but yes, emotionally, right? We shouldn't want to evoke those pains. We shouldn't want to have to evoke those things. But we do it because it's our responsibility before God. And hopefully, our children will submit to those corrections. Again, there's a bunch of Proverbs that covers correction, the need for it. Proverbs 3 and verse 11, My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor detest his correction, for whom the Lord loves he corrects, just as the Father the Son in whom he delights. You know, parents, rather children, who don't have parents in their lives, one or both, are at a disadvantage because they don't have this. They don't receive the correction, and so they're not receiving the love either. You know, we as parents, because we provide, because we are there as providers in a physical, in a spiritual, and an emotional way, we develop a connection with our children, don't we? And in doing so, we earn the right to correct. We earn the right to correct. We earn their respect. And when we correct, we build that respect. Because we exercise the authority which God gave us as parents. We exercise His authority. The proverb writer in Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 15 says, The rod of rebuke give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings shame to his mother. We want our children to be somebody that when we raise them up and they become young adults, we can go, I am proud of this creature which God put me in their life and put me responsible for raising. And now they have become an adult and they are part of society and they're productive and they're helpful and they're kind, right? I don't know how many of you watch Bluey. We keep kids at our house, and so I watch more Bluey than I'd like to. But there's an episode of Bluey where the little kids are asking Mom, but Mom, why, but why, but why? Why do we have to be nice, and why do we have to clean up, and why do we have to do all the things, and why do we need to be on time? Because they were going to go meet somebody at the park, I think, in that episode. And the mother's answer to why, all the whys? Because I want you to be a lovely person. Because the people we're going to go meet are lovely people, and I want you to grow up and be a lovely person. Parents, isn't that what we want to be? We want to raise our children so that they become lovely people. Well, how do we do that? It starts with discipline and correction. Proverb writer in Proverbs 19 and verse 18 says, Chasten your son while there is hope. Do not set your heart on his destruction. Kids, your parents don't discipline you because they want you to be in pain. They don't discipline you because they don't love you, right? Discipline and love go hand in hand. They go together. They go together. And, sadly, rebellion, right? Because of rebellion, maybe there's discipline. You know, you consider God created us with free will. God told Adam and Eve all that they needed be and do and know, and they had this relationship in the garden which we struggle to comprehend at creation. We struggle to comprehend the pre-sin world and what it was. But because of sin, right? Satan came and told Eve, well, you won't really die. Did God say that? You won't really die? And of course Eve, wanting to be like God, the spirit of rebellion, right? That's the spirit of rebellion. Decided it was okay to do what Eve pleased, not what God had instructed. And like children will do, rebellion. Well, rebellion is bad. Rebellion is bad all the time. Children, rebellion is bad. Don't be rebellious to your parents. Even when your parents are asking you to do something that you think is completely unreasonable. Completely unreasonable, right? As teenagers, we get into a phase where we struggle with this. It's a season of life, teenagers, wherein you might find yourself being rebellious. Don't be rebellious. Submit to your parents. Submit to your parents because that's what's expected of you before God. And is it a big deal? Yeah, it's a big deal. You don't think it was a big deal? Go back and look at Deuteronomy chapter 21. Go back and see what God instructed Moses to do with the rebellious child. When parents had reached their wits' end and I can't deal with this rebellious child anymore, Deuteronomy 21 verse 18. A man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have chastened him, will not heed them. Notice the level of rebellion. He won't listen, not to his father, not to his mother. They can't be reasoned with. They can't be corrected. Verse 19, then his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city, to the gate of his city. They shall say to the elders of his city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is gluttonous and drunkard. Then all the men of the city shall stone him to death with stones. Is rebellion a big deal? Yeah, it's a big deal. Christians, is rebellion a big deal in our lives? Yeah, it's a big deal. Because you see, that same spirit of rebellion that's condemned to death is still condemned to death. The death of eternal separation from God and an eternal hellfire existence awaits those who are rebellious today. Rebellion is a big deal. Well, how do we balance this? Love and authority. Again, the Hebrew writer, Hebrews 12 and verse 11. We've read, or 7 through 11. We read this, right? We have to balance disciplines with love. We have to reflect upon the relationship that we are to have with God. The ideal of fathers, right? The ideal of fathers is in God. We as adults recognize that we had human fathers. Those human fathers corrected us. We respected them for it. We honored them in spite of their rod of correction, right? We did those things. Verse 10, Hebrews 12 and verse 10. For they, our earthly fathers, indeed for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them. But he, God, for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Because we are his children in Christ, he corrects us and he chastens us. He instructs us in how we should be. And yes, like we gave our earthly fathers respect and honor, we've got to honor him. We've got to respect him and submit to his rule. Submit to his rule in our lives as Christians. And so, children, submit to the rule of your parents in this way. A balance of love and a balance of authority. Correction. Also, parents are to be encouraging and nurturing. Colossians 3 and verse 21, fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged, right? Don't provoke them. Don't discourage them to the point that they... You've probably seen this, right? We probably know of people who maybe they're always naysayers. They are on these children. Well, you can't ever be that thing, right? The kids have all these dreams. Isn't that the promise of youth? All the dreams of a life before us? Fathers, don't destroy that. Don't crush that. And of course, there's a balance there. I can recall at one point in our children's youth, they had one that was really enamored with the stage and with acting and theater and all the things. Well, I'm gonna go to L.A. and I'm gonna be an actor. I'm gonna be famous. That's cool, son. Make sure you got another plan. Make sure you got another plan, right? And maybe the same goes for, well, the kids with ambitions. I'm going to be a professional. Name the sport, right? That's cool. I wish you the best, and I'll encourage you to be the best, right? But have another plan. Maybe wisdom dictates that. But don't discourage them to the point that, well, mom and dad, they don't ever believe in me, right? It's a fine line. Encourage and nurture, but yet be real. And we as parents have to be that sometimes. And then I've got another passage up here, 1 Peter chapter 5. I know. Peter here is talking about the office of elders, right? 1 Peter 5 and verse 3, he says, "Nor as being lords over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. Fathers, as the head of the household, we have a responsibility to our household in this way. And so, fathers, if we think about fatherhood, husbands, if you think about that of being a husband, being the head of your household, we should be the same way as shepherds of the flock of God. Not being lords over those entrusted to us. Is your family a blessing entrusted to you? Yes. Right? Fathers and husbands, set your minds on this. Your family is that which has been entrusted to your care. And so you, as the husband, as the head of the house, as the father, have been entrusted to be an example, a good example of who you're to be, who God would have us to be, to your house. And then the psalmist, Psalm 103 and verse 13, says, "As a father pities his children, so the Lord pities those who fear him." Now, fathers, husbands, we're not to rule our house in such a way as to just rule in fear, right? That's not who we're called to be. We need to be caring for those whom we rule over, who are our children and our wives. So in our context of this discussion, we need to think about what that looks like. We need to learn from this as parents that we can reflect God's love, reflect God's compassion and love in our parent-child relationship, because it's going to build that of trust, and it's going to open those pathways of communication. James in James chapter 1 discusses communication, right? Verse 19. "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath." Now I know this is a general, right? This is generally something that all Christians should be and do. But especially in our families, right? Communications are so important. So let us be swift to hear, right? When your kid runs up, "Mom or Dad, I've got this thing," and do we shut them down? Do we tell them to be quiet? Do we not listen to them? Or do we give them time and our attention? Folks, we're struggling today as a society with these little devices. And we get on our couch and we sit right there like this. Parents, husbands, wives, kids. Do we do that around the living room? And the littlest one maybe doesn't have one. They come in the room and they're excited. Yeah, that's nice. Did you even take your eyes off of your device for just a minute? What attention are we giving these people that we've been entrusted in our lives to care for, to raise, to instruct? Put it down, be swift to hear. Hold your tongue and let them speak for a moment, right? And be slow to wrath. James in James chapter 3 goes on in this idea of communication. In verse 2, he says, "For we all stumble in many things, but if anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look at also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small water wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a forest a little fire kindles. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature. And it is set on fire by hell. Folks, our tongue. Our tongue gets us in so much trouble. So much trouble. With our tongue, again back to the idea of discipline correction. Fathers, we especially, I think, can do this. Mothers too. We can cut down our children. Chop them off at the knees before they even get 2 words out of their mouth with our tongue. With our tongue. With our speech, with our wrath. And sometimes it's not even our tongue, it's our nonverbal communication. Right? We can destroy rather than build up. The trust that a kid has for their parents, and the trust that a child develops from their parents, because parents, we learn to trust our children too, right? We learn their character. Well, little Johnny or little Susie, they're this kind of child. We know our children. When a person says, well, your kid did, Mom and Dad, if you're being truthful with yourself, you know if your kid is the kind of kid that does things like that. Now, sometimes that catches us off guard and catches us by surprise, right? But over time, we develop this communication. We develop trust one to another. One to another. So we need to be active in our listening. We need to have empathy for our children. We need to be consistent in communication. And parents, especially, we need to model behavior. You ever heard a parent go, well, where did you hear? Well, Mom and Dad got a pretty good idea where little Johnny or Susie heard, right? Kids are tape recorders. Don't believe it? Have one around for about 10 minutes. They're going to do, they're going to say, they're going to act exactly like they see you do, say, and act. Model proper behavior for them. Model proper behavior so that when they grow up and have a conflict, they can resolve that conflict, right? And not shout and scream and throw and kick and bite and fight, right? Model good behavior. That's who we want our children to become. We want them to grow up to be pleasant people, don't we? And encourage them in the faith. Spiritual growth. Parents, don't ever forget. Your number one responsibility, beyond making them to be tolerable human beings, is to raise them up so that they will be spiritual people, so that they will recognize and honor their God, their Creator, and the Savior who gave Himself on the cross for their sins. 2 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 5, when I call to remembrance the genuine faith that is in you, which dwelt first in your grandmother Lois, your mother Eunice, and persuaded is in you also. We talked about this last week. The impact that extended family, that parents have in a spiritual way upon their children cannot be minimized. Folks, it's a real deal. It's a big deal. It's the most important thing that you as a parent can do. Instill within your child a spiritual identity, a spiritual belief and faith and trust. And again, we do that by being the right model of that. Well, I've talked a lot about parents and a little bit about children. Children, for real quick, let's talk about children. What's a child responsible for? Well, in Ephesians 6 and verse 1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. Now, Paul there is quoting Exodus 20 verse 12, right? Honor your father and mother that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. There's the promise that Paul talks about, right? It is that promise, or rather that command, which has with it a hope and a promise for the future. You do it because where Israel, where you're going, in the land that you're going to possess, your days will be made long because you do what you're supposed to. Because you honor your father and mother. Because you obey your parents. Now, notice that Paul doesn't say just blindly obey your parents. I've known of people whose parents absolutely objected forcefully to their becoming a child of God, right? To their becoming a Christian. You can't obey a parent when they say don't obey God, right? But even in the most difficult of situations, we as children have a responsibility to try to obey our parents, wherein it's compatible with what the Lord has designed for us, commanded of us. So children must honor their parents, must respect their parents, right? You go, well, but my mom or my dad wasn't a very good mom or dad. Okay, so be it. You still have an obligation to honor your father and mother before God. Why? Because it's a commandment. It's not just a suggestion, it's a commandment. So if we're going to do what God tells us to, we're going to have to honor our father and mother. And we're going to have to figure out how to do that, right? Even when it's been a struggle, we have to figure out how to do that. Why? Well, because we have a responsibility to our parents, especially as they get older, as they age. They become unable to care for themselves. Life comes in full circle, doesn't it? You know, when we were born, we couldn't care for ourselves, and our mother and our father, they provided for us in every way. Physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. You name it, they provided it. Well, children, as our parents age and become unable to care for themselves, right, we see it come full circle. And we, in the middle of our lives, find ourselves caring for parents, don't we? And maybe some of you are in that season of life where you're doing that. Certainly that is a hard thing to do. That's a hard thing to do. But it is our responsibility as children to do that and to be there. Paul in his letter to Timothy, 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 4, writes, if any widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. Again, I mentioned earlier, we quote this verse and we tie it to fathers and husbands. More generally, well, more specifically rather, he's talking to children, right? Children and grandchildren. Take care of your aged parents and grandparents, because this is good and acceptable before God. This is what's expected of you. This is honoring them. Repay them for raising you, so to speak. Verse 5. Now she who is really a widow and left alone, trusting God, continues in supplications and prayers night and day. But she who lives in pleasure is dead while she lives. These things command that they may be blameless. But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Children, take care of, in every way that's necessary, take care of your parents and grandparents, or you're worse than an unbeliever. That's what Paul said. That's what Paul said. Now, that's not just a physical, right? That's not just, well, I'm going to pay and pack them up, put them in a home. It's not caring for them. That may see to their physical needs. And yes, it may reach a time when you are unable to care for them, right? Because they become dangerous to themselves, they become dangerous to you. I understand that. But that doesn't mean just ship them up, pack them up and ship them off. Make sure that they're cared for. Not just physically, not just that they have a place to lay their head and food to eat. Care for them emotionally, right? Spiritually. Jesus in Matthew chapter 15 is addressing a problem that was prominent and prevalent in his day. In Matthew 15 and verse 1, the scribes and Pharisees who were from Jerusalem came to Jesus saying, why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat bread. Now, they're complaining to Jesus, these guys that run around with you, they're not washing their hands. Why don't you do something about it? That's the tradition, right? The Jewish tradition. Notice, though, Jesus is going to hit right where it hurts. right where it hurts. Verse 3, he answered and said to them, why do you, talking to the Pharisees and scribes, why do you also transgress the commandment of God because of your tradition? For God commanded, saying, honor your father and mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, whatever is profit you might have received from me is a gift to God, then he need not honor his father or mother. Thus you have made the commandment of God of no effect by your tradition. You read on, Jesus says, hypocrites. Well did Isaiah prophesy about you, saying, these people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me, and in vain they worship me, teaching his doctrine the commandment of men. Now what's he talking about? What were they doing? Well, the scholars will tell you what was being practiced was that under Jewish law and tradition, again, that they're commanded by the law of Moses, honor your father and mother. But as father and mother get older, these children, they get disgruntled, or they, out of spite, decide, well, I'm not gonna. They become estranged from their parents, essentially. Well, it's a curse, right? You get taken out to the gates if you're rebellious, if you dishonor your parents. So I'm not going to dishonor them. Instead, I'm going to give my portion to the Lord. They take it down to the temple and they'd offer it to God. Well, it's God's now. I can't give it to you, Mom or Dad. It's God's. I can't support you. I can't care for you. I can't do these things. So they were dishonoring their parents by doing this. And of course they said, well, but I made the vow to give it to God, so it can't be yours. I can't do this. That's what they were doing. In the Gospel of Mark gives his account. He calls it korban, right? The word here, it's a Hebrew word. It's been made a gift. What would have been your portion, Mom and Dad, to care for you, to see to your needs, it's been made a gift to God, and so I can't take it back. I can't take it back. I can't honor you that way. And so in doing this, these Jews were essentially saying that they didn't have any obligation to aid their parents. And so they were skirting the law, if you will. They were trying to find the loophole. Well, I don't have to really honor my parents. Matter of fact, I can curse my parents in this roundabout way by just giving the gift to God. It's been made a gift to God. They were shirking their responsibility. And Jesus called them out on it. Don't shirk your responsibility as a child. Care for your parents, for your grandparents. Don't in some way say, well, it's God's, and God has taken up all that is for you, and thereby shirk your responsibility to those things. Parents, or rather children, must care for their parents. And while we're on the topic of children caring for parents, as we reach that age wherein we need help, be gentle with your children. Be gentle with your children, because it's among the hardest things that a child can do. And so some applications, a few takeaways. First and foremost, parents, and children for that matter, model Christ-like behavior. When every member of the family, from the parent to the child, is all modeling a Christ-like behavior, think about the peace that exists within your house, within the home. And to make the broader connection, all of these applications, as we have in each lesson, we are of the household of faith as Christians, one to another. We share these relationships within the house of God as the church. And so, let us make sure that whatever we do, together or apart, that we're modeling Christ-like behavior to one another, to those around us. And again, consistency and discipline. Discipline must be done consistently, must be done from a place of love, right? Must align with these biblical principles and these biblical truths. Don't spare the rod to the detriment of your child. And the same is true for the church family. In our church, we must discipline consistently, right? And appropriately. We must keep communications open as well, within the house and within the church. We must continue to grow. We must continue to seek growth. We said this morning in our Bible study, you never are sitting still, right? Spiritually, you're never in a single place for very long. We're in a constant state of motion. And spiritually, we're either growing towards God and growing towards perfection and growing towards what He would have us to be, or we are separating ourselves. We are drifting apart. We need to look, each of us, at ourselves. Where am I? Where am I to my fellow laborers in Christ? Where am I in the household? Where am I in my relationship to God? And then as we get to that season of life wherein we have a responsibility to care for them, we must, as children, care for aging parents. Honor them because that is their due. Recognize all that they have done for you in your life, all the years in which they cared for you, and likewise care for them. Care for them in love. Care for them in Christ. And be committed. Committed to family. It's a conscious decision that each of us must make to prioritize the family, to invest our time in the family, to ensure that our home is centered around Christ, centered around honoring Him, being the household that we are to be. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 10, Paul says, "Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith." Folks, we get that, right? We understand that in our own households. Every chance that we have to do something good for our loved ones, don't we try to do it? Well, Christians, the household of faith, we must likewise want to do good unto each one, each other, as often as we have opportunity. Well, folks, I realize this is not a lesson that maybe teaches one what they must do to be a child of God. If you know what you need to do to be a Christian, you haven't done so, why not? Why do you wait? Come and be a child of God. Be part of that family. It's the greatest thing you can ever do in this life. And it has a reward which far exceeds anything that is in this life. Maybe you've done that in the past, but you sin in a public way. You need to make a public correction of those things. Whatever we can do for you spiritually, come forward, make it known as we stand and as we sing.